Hi everyone, my name is M6Sund, and this week I have Skinner's Chapter 11, The Self and Others. So this chapter begins by telling us about programs such as applied behavior analysis and other behavior studies that focus on behavior, but do not focus on the person and the inner conscience, or the person, the little voice that people misconceive that we have inside of us that affect and drive an individual's behavior. Because of this, dependent on the situation or experience presented in front of us, there is a potential for multiple people to manifest themselves inside of us in order to customize ourselves to our surroundings. Reverting back to last week's lessons, the soldier is a different person that acts differently around his military friends than he would his own family. In some cases, this inward split personalities can become extroverted, which researchers have classified as multiple personality disorder or dissociated identity disorder, where a person cannot suppress the inner personalities that they have, and they take on a different identity to survive in the situation or emotional state that they are faced with as a defense mechanism. So the first section is knowing oneself. Humans take on a more in-depth role in behavior because of self-awareness. When you have self-awareness and self-knowledge, this is driven by your inner feelings about yourself and referring to yourself by using the term I. An example of this is guilt, anger, or sadness as emotional responses to your own behavior and projecting those inner responses into further displays of behavior, like throwing things, crying or screaming, or hitting yourself. For instance, I dropped my wallet, so I screamed and threw something at a wall in a fit of anger. This portion also discusses that our inner self is affected by our culture and the environment we are raised in and the personality that we develop because of it. For instance, some cultures tend to be more outgoing while others are more reserved. Some people may have been taught to be more observant and cautious, while others are taught to be openly trusting towards others without reserves. Because of this, knowing yourself and self-reflection on your actions and explanation for behavior revert back to phrases such as, "that's just who I am," or "I was made that way," showing that we really have no control over our behavior because it is predetermined by the nature and nurture in which we went through in their stages of mental development. Knowing another person. We can never truly know another person because we cannot hear or feel the thoughts and feelings of the other person. We can only predict their behavior based off of historical knowledge of the individual's environment and displays of past behavior. To begin to know and understand another person's personal thoughts and behaviors and feelings, we essentially have to put ourselves in their shoes and think, how would you feel or act and react presented with the situation? Basically, it's knowing oneself, but applying another person's experiences and past displays of behavior to calculate the most likely response that they'll give with a presented scenario. Another hard-hitting point is knowing another person is recognizing that behavior and outwardly displayed emotions are not always true reflections of the inner self. For example, me personally, when I am upset, I do not like to show emotion. Therefore, I tend to come across as passive or just quieter than normal, but no one really truly knows that I'm sad. Or another example would be when I'm angry, I actually cry because I don't show anger, and I'm not crying because I'm sad. but I'm crying because I can't control the situation that is in front of me. Therefore, instead of getting angry, I uncontrollably tear up. Therefore, by knowing another person and their history and their past behavior, it can aid in having sympathy for that person and predicting their feelings based off of the experiences that the individual has previously had. Managing oneself. You cannot manage oneself without knowing oneself. Skinner describes managing oneself as manipulating and controlling yourself logically and morally, meaning that you can change your behavior or the reaction of a stimulating situation based off of your past experience and feeling, and not wanting to portray that past behavior and have the same consequences as the previous time that you were faced with a similar situation. Thinking to yourself, if I act this way, how will I be affected, and how will my behavior affect those around me based on your previous experience of displaying this behavior? And do I want that same reaction and same effect on myself as well as others because of this behavior? The importance in this consequential effect on the behavior is not the emotional effect that may be evoked as a result of the consequences. Research is finding it more common that the autonomic responses are able to be manipulated by operating conditioning as well. Originally, these autonomic responses were thought to be affected naturally, and they just occurred because you're running, your heart rate speeds up, you're scared, your heart rate speeds up. But they have been able to prove that through condition-based exposure, it can be controlled. So for instance, a runner, they run frequently, they condition their bodies. So when they first began running, their heart rate would speed up, their pulse would speed up. But over time, they conditioned themselves that their body naturally reacts and it no longer speeds up as fast and rapidly as it did before when they first began running. Also, there are resiliency trainings now where for like military individuals and athletes, you can help control your breathing, your pulse, your heart rate, and even your body temperature to remain calm in stressful situations through operant conditioning. So managing another person. Just as with managing oneself, in order to manage another person, you have to have knowledge about that individual and to be able to predict their behavior. If you can't predict their behavior, then if you can predict their behavior, you can set the tone and manipulate the situation to set a different perception to that individual about the situation. So for instance, coaches can encourage athletes and parents encourage children. The way they do this is by knowing the other person and knowing the response and behavior that is derived from this. So for instance, a parent will create an adversive technique for a child. So a child's trying to cross a balance beam. Well, they know that the child is going to be scared. The child may be scared of heights due to past experience. So they will encourage the child before they even have a chance to think those thoughts and have a behavioral reaction to not cross the balance beam. They'll automatically go, "Oh, you're so brave," or "Look at you go, look at how far you've come, you're almost done, you're so brave." And that will set the tone for the child, and the child will begin to feel brave. Therefore, they can continue crossing the balance beam. And the consequences of that is they know other people are going to see them as brave, and they now are no longer scared of that situation, but feel brave and confident. Other techniques for managing another person are conditioning. So a coach telling an athlete, it may hurt really right now, it might be hard, but if you do it more, the easier it will get, because you become conditioned to how hard it is and the effect on your body. Then there's your emotional and motivational manipulation, the parent encouraging and reframing the mindset of the child crossing the balance beam. Teaching, teachers create positive attitudes and the consequences along with the behavior, like at school. It may be hard now, but if you do it and you learn it now, you're not going to struggle in the future. Also, helping is another technique which focuses on the emotional state and influences to soothe the needs of the ego. So reinforce behavior with praise so that the emotional needs are being met. And then you have governing, which gives an individual a sense of purpose, making a person believe that they have a responsibility or a duty to behave or act a certain way as a representation of self and the community. Entertaining is the last one. It's being creative. So not necessarily, this concept isn't fully acknowledged in managing another person, but it's trying to provoke a response and behavior by the feelings that the artist is trying to portray. So, for instance, a picture of children sharing is to provoke the behavior of sharing and feelings of kindness. So, my questions this week are, personality is broken down and derived from the word personal. Do you feel that yourself is truly personal if it is developed and influenced by culture and environment? The next question is, after reviewing this chapter, if the self is predetermined by the environmental influence, do you think that you can change yourself? And then last but not least, do you feel that it is possible to know and manage another person and change and adapt that person once their self has already been groomed into functioning in its own norm? Thanks, guys.